True crime is filled with shocking twists, but some cases are so bizarre they sound almost unbelievable. From unexplained disappearances to crimes that defy logic, these true crime stories left investigators baffled and the rest of the world searching for answers. Today we're counting down the top 5 strangest true crime cases, each one more disturbing and mysterious than the last. In November of 2004, the quiet Scottish town of Nairn was shattered when Alistair Wilson, a young bank manager and father of 2, was taken down on his own doorstep. Just moments earlier, a stranger had handed him an empty blue envelope, then calmly returned and opened fire. But who was this strange man, and what did he want with Alistair? Well, Alistair Wilson was known by his friends and family as Al, and he was 30 years old, Scottish, and living in Nairn, Scotland at the time of the case. He was a business manager at his local Bank of Scotland branch. Alistair lived on Crescent Road with his wife Veronica and their 2 sons. After he'd met Veronica, who was a graphic designer, the 2 quickly fell in love. The relationship moved so fast that the 2 were engaged within just 6 weeks of meeting. Alistair and Veronica ultimately got married in 1998, and together they built a small but loving family. Alistair was defined by friends and family as smart, kind, and a sharp man. Alistair loved his family to bits, and it didn't look like he had any enemies. He lived a quiet life in Nairn with his family, and at the time of the case, he was only 2 weeks away from letting his current job go. Now, Alistair loved working there, don't get me wrong, but as time went on, he was becoming frustrated. The bank was constantly changing its policies and regulations, and it was just not the same work environment anymore. Alistair was even contemplating changing his field of work entirely. He wanted to go into environmental consultancy, so all in all, he was working his job. He was looking for a new avenue of work, and he spent most of his time with his family. There was no indication that Alistair was struggling or that he was scared of anyone. Alistair was just living his normal life, and things were going pretty well. But one day, less than a month away from Christmas, Alistair's life would be taken away from him in the most sudden and inexplicable way imaginable. Alistair and his family lived in a very beautiful Victorian-style home, and a few days before the tragedy, he was a busy man. He was out and about with the family, buying Christmas gifts for everyone, and he was also hosting people at his house for a fun and enjoyable family dinner. This is what I mean when I say Alistair was living a very quiet, peaceful, and normal life up until the end. He was taking his wife and kids to stores and malls. He was helping wrap up gifts and decorate the house, and he was doing all the things any of us would be doing this time of year. On November 27th, Alistair's family was hosting a small dinner for friends, and that was also pretty uneventful. They filled themselves with food, talked for hours, and time flew by. The next day, on November 28th, Alistair, one of his close friends, and their kids went out for a trek in the wooded areas. This was quite normal for Alistair. It was a fun outdoor activity, and it refreshed everyone. These guys were busy with their hike, whereas Veronica, the friend's wife, and the youngest children went to a play center, where the women chatted and the kids played on their own. This carried on until the afternoon, and at around 3 p.m., the friends waved goodbye and thanked the Wilson family for such a fun time. After the guests left, Veronica handed Alistair a list of things that they needed from the grocery store for dinner, and Alistair went out the door with one of his sons. Meanwhile, Veronica and the other son were at home, and they were just tidying things up after hosting the dinner with friends. Alistair came back from the grocery store, and then he went to wash the family car. Point is, Alistair wasn't behaving abnormally. He didn't look like he was on edge, and if he was, he certainly didn't let it show. It was about as normal of a day as it could possibly get. The family then had dinner at the table, and before they knew it, it was time to put the kids to bed. So Alistair was on storytelling duty, whereas Veronica went down to do the laundry. The kids were tucked into bed and were dozing off as Alistair read them a bedtime story. Now, at that time, there was someone else in Alistair's home, too. They were actually looking after a friend's 18-month-old toddler at the time. So there was Alistair, Veronica, their 2 sons, and a toddler in the house all at the same time. The parents of the toddler were due to pick him up that same evening. So as Alistair exited the children's room and made his way downstairs, which was at about 7 p.m., that was when the doorbell rang, and Alistair and Veronica thought that it was their friends coming to pick up the baby. But here's the thing, they didn't need to ring the doorbell. They could have easily entered the house through the back door after knocking, which was open, and the friends knew that. So the couple thought that it was someone else, and Veronica went to open the door. Standing in front of Veronica was an unknown man. The man was decently tall. He was wearing dark jeans, a blue jacket, and a baseball hat, which was tugged down to hide his face. Veronica didn't get a chance to make out much of what the man looked like because it was getting dark and the man's face was hidden by that baseball cap. The only thing Veronica could tell was that he looked to be in his 30s or 40s. He was clean-shaven and had a bit of a stocky build. As Veronica was making sense of who the man was, he suddenly spoke, and he asked for Alistair Wilson, her husband. This man, who was a practical stranger to Veronica, knew where Alistair lived and asked for him by his full name. That was the only thing the man said to Veronica, though. Alistair Wilson. In Veronica's mind, the man was probably someone from work, and he wanted to talk to Alistair about something. So she told the man to wait there, and she went to call her husband. After a bit, Alistair went to greet the man, and Veronica told the police later on that Alistair was out of the front door for about 10 minutes. There wasn't any shouting or anything, though. It seemed like the two were just talking. In fact, 2 witnesses outside Alistair's house also saw this conversation go down. Even though they don't know what Alistair and the baseball cap man were talking about, they were talking. It seemed normal, non-confrontational, and not heated. So Veronica went about the rest of her work, and after 10 minutes or so, Alistair walked back into the house, and in his hand was a blue envelope with the name Paul written on it. Alistair decided to open the envelope, but there was nothing in it. The envelope was empty. And this left both Veronica and Alistair confused. Why would a man come all the way from wherever he came from, ask for Alistair, and hand him over an empty envelope with nothing but a name scribbled on it? So Alistair decided to go back to the man. I'm assuming Alistair thought that the man had given him the wrong envelope and wanted to let him know that it was empty, but we're not really sure. But regardless, Veronica remembered Alistair making a beeline for the front door, and a couple minutes passed. And after that, Veronica's life changed for the worst. She heard 3 deafening banging noises, and she sprinted towards the front door. And there, she made a terrible discovery. Her husband, Alistair Wilson, who was alive and well just seconds ago, was now lying on the ground with 3 firearm injuries to his body. He was alive, but barely holding on. Veronica immediately jumped into action, and she ran from the house to a hotel right across the road from their house, the Havelock Hotel, and alerted people that she needed help. And as she was running to get help for her gravely injured husband, the last thing she saw was that same man in that baseball cap in the distance, just walking away. And in his hand, he clutched that same blue envelope Alistair had been holding not too long ago. I don't know how far the man went or if Veronica tried to stop him or anything, but she obviously had other, more urgent things to worry about. And with that, the mystery man was gone. Emergency services arrived at the scene and took Alistair away, but things were not looking good. He was in very bad shape, and tragically, he could not be saved. When paramedics arrived at the house, they saw Veronica with Alistair on the floor, holding and pressing towels to his injuries, but it wasn't working. Alistair Wilson lost his life before he could even be treated at the hospital. His injuries were fatal, and nothing could be done to save him. To think that he was attacked in his own home, with his wife and children in the house, is just so heartbreaking. And what's even more devastating was the fact that one of Alistair's sons, Andrew, had seen his father lying on the ground after the crime. This is not something a young boy should ever have to see. Alistair was living his life normally, and then one evening, everything was taken away from the Wilson family, and they were left with crippling pain and a lot of questions. The police knew that this was a very bizarre case. They needed to figure out who this stranger was. They asked around, and witnesses said the same thing, that he was seen talking to Alistair just moments before his untimely passing. There were CCTV cameras in the neighboring areas, but I'm not sure if they were pointed at the right house or in the direction in which Veronica saw the stranger walk into the night, but the police couldn't find anything. The stranger had vanished. He'd taken down someone he knew, and then he was just gone. The police managed to find out one thing, though: the firearm that was used to end Alistair's life. They found out what type of weapon it was, and it was a 1930s .25 caliber pocket arm, which was a really popular weapon in Germany at the time. So other than this information and the name Paul, the police literally had no evidence. They didn't even have the envelope with them, so they couldn't conduct any forensic tests on the paper to find any trace of unknown DNA. Also, this was 2004, so advanced DNA testing really wasn't even a thing at that point, but the police still carried on with their search. For a while, a lot of suspicion fell on Veronica, Alistair's wife. The police always suspect the spouse first in cases like these. She was the only one who gave the version of events of how she discovered Alistair, and she was also the only person besides Alistair who'd seen this mystery man in the flesh, although his face was still hard to make out. The police suspected Veronica for a long time, but there was just no evidence to support these claims. Veronica wasn't being shady. She wasn't talking to anyone before Alistair's passing. She wasn't having an affair. She was literally a heartbroken and grief-stricken widow who was left with her and Alistair's 2 sons, and she did her best to provide as much information as possible to the police. And she also appealed to the public to come forward to give any information to the police that would help solve her husband's murder. Nearly a month later, in December of 2004, some council workmen were cleaning gullies or drains in Nairn, and they came across something weird. There was something at the bottom of the gully. When the council workmen looked closer, they knew exactly what they were looking at, and it was a firearm. The police were called to the scene, and when they got a hold of the weapon that seemed like someone had tossed it to get rid of it, they were shocked to discover that it was the same German firearm that was used on Alistair a month ago. The police searched the surrounding area for anything else, but that was pretty much all they found. They even tried to check CCTV footage from a month before leading up to the discovery, but again, they couldn't find anything. They couldn't find who tossed the weapon into the gully. A senior detective even traveled all the way to the Czech Republic in eastern Germany to trace the history of the gun, who had bought it, and whether it had been stolen or not. But again, nothing came of it. The police tried to conduct DNA tests on the weapon, but they were unsuccessful. They just couldn't find out who had used the firearm on Alistair. It was the same weapon, but the police had yet to find out who pulled the trigger. Their best bet was that the weapon must have been stolen by someone, and then it was used on Alistair and eventually tossed down the drain. But there were still a lot of holes in this story, and a lot of unanswered questions. Months passed, and the police were unsuccessful in uncovering the truth of Alistair's murder. 12 years later, in November of 2016, a call was made anonymously at a radio station, and they had something to say about Alistair's murder. The person divulged that they knew who Alistair's killer was, and even though he didn't go into too much detail, he said that the killer lived in the Highlands, and that a businessman in Northern Ireland knew the killer. No one knows whether the call was a hoax, but the police did look into Alistair's history as a business manager at the Bank of Scotland, but they found nothing interesting. And just like that, more years passed, and in October of 2020, Alistair's son, Andrew, had now grown up into a young man, and he also made his first appearance on a BBC interview, and he appealed for help to find his dad's murderer. He also went on to describe the final moments of his dad and how a young Andrew saw his dad lying on the floor after being attacked. Later on in March of 2022, the police turned to the public and asked for more information on 2 mysterious men who were seen armed at a beach near the town Alistair lived in, about a month before Alistair's crime. But again, nothing came from this. Then more time passed, and understandably the Wilson family was very agitated at the way the police were now handling the case. There had been zero progress, and this led to the Wilson family filing a complaint against the police. As recently as September of 2024, approximately 2 decades following Alistair's mysterious murder, a complete reinvestigation of the case was ordered. Was it a targeted hit? Was it a case of mistaken identity? Who was this guy, and how did he know Alistair by name and where he lived? What did Alistair and the killer talk about for those 10 minutes? And what motive did he have for ending the life of Alistair? The unfortunate truth is, all of those questions remain unanswered, and the search for Alistair's killer is still underway. Shannon Maddle was born and raised in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Ever since she was young, Shannon enjoyed the spotlight. She was born to entertain people. She was vibrant and very outgoing, and she was all smiles all the time. When she was a teen, Shannon attended Central Memorial High School, and she was active in music, drama, and other programs of that same line, on top of being an alumnus of the Calgary Stampede show bands. By the time she was an adult, Shannon wanted to become a musician, as well as a voice actress. Shannon was also very funny, and she loved making people laugh by doing animated voices and putting on acts. So, realizing her knack, Shannon participated in multiple comedy improv games, in film, stage, and voice acting gigs to not only make a living, but also do something that she loved as a job. Now, Shannon, being an aspiring voice actress, had to attend a lot of auditions. She would go to different cities, traveling for long hours to get to these auditions, but she loved everything regardless. But she often forgot things. She was the type of person who would set a reminder or an alarm for any meetings or catching up with family. Otherwise, things would just slip from her mind. And I think a lot of us can probably relate to that. Well, Shannon soon met a man named Joshua Burgess when she was at a party in 2010. Shannon was 21 at the time, and she and Joshua just hit it off. They were the complete opposites of each other, yet they complemented each other perfectly. Shannon was goofy, outgoing, and witty, whereas Joshua was brainy, quiet, and intelligent. After 4 years of dating, Joshua and Shannon got married in May of 2014. The couple was happy, even though the two had very conflicting work schedules and barely saw each other at home. But Shannon would be out doing voice acting gigs and Joshua would be at work, but the couple were determined to make it work. They talked about anything and everything when they did get the time to see each other. They were genuinely happy. But neither of them could have anticipated what lay just around the corner, and their happy marriage was about to be shattered. Joshua and Shannon were very open and honest with each other about everything going on in their lives. Perhaps it was the distance, their jobs, or simply that craving for closeness, but the couple decided to pursue an open marriage. Basically, Joshua and Shannon wanted to take the relationship to the next level. Or rather a different level, I guess, because they wanted to dabble in polygamy. So Shannon and Joshua both would stay still married, but they were free to date and be physically intimate with other people. I mean, to each their own, I guess. It was something that a lot of friends and family of the couple didn't even know about, but some very close people, especially Shannon's sister, did know about the arrangement. Now, this was weird for a couple of reasons, the most notable being Shannon and Joshua's haste to engage in an open marriage just a few weeks after their wedding. It just doesn't sit right when you hear it. And the fact that they kept it a secret from everyone except a few people, that's also strange. I mean, if this is your lifestyle of choice, I guess anyone can do whatever they want to do, but why get married just to immediately make that marriage open and then keep it a secret? That part doesn't make much sense. But on top of that, if this is your lifestyle and you're not ashamed of it, why go to such great lengths just to hide it from the people you love? If polygamy in your mind isn't anything to be ashamed of, why not pursue that in full force? Well, regardless of the strangeness, both Shannon and Joshua seemed happier than ever with this new agreement. Both of them engaged in extramarital affairs, but there was no guilt or hiding it whatsoever. Shannon and Joshua even met each other's partners from time to time. And to keep it short, things were going fairly well for them. Now, this arrangement started wonderfully, ideal considering the results. There was no jealousy, no hard feelings, and both parties had their desires fulfilled, both inside and outside their marriage. But sometime later, cracks started to form. It was actually Shannon who ultimately decided that they should end their open marriage. Shannon proposed that the two of them break up with their respective partners and keep the marriage monogamous. So, that's what they did. Shannon was dating a man named Ian at the time, and she broke up with him, whereas Joshua was dating a woman whose name we don't know, but he also broke up with her. The two had closed their open relationship about a month before the events of today's case, and the couple were now exclusively involved with only each other. Well, that was until a week later, when Shannon came across some text messages on Joshua's phone. It was from a woman that he was seeing during their open relationship, and Shannon was appalled that Joshua was still talking to this other woman, even though their marriage was now exclusive. Shannon felt betrayed by this, and rightfully so. They both supposedly admitted their mistakes, tried to right their wrongs and get things back on track. But now Joshua was going behind her back, and at this point, having an affair, plain and simple. The texts were very flirtatious, as if they hadn't even broken up in the first place. The texts also alluded to the fact that Joshua would soon divorce Shannon for this woman, and this was what completely floored Shannon. Now, even though the open relationship between Shannon and Joshua was mutual, Shannon still loved Joshua, and this was very likely why she asked to end the extramarital arrangements. She wanted Joshua in whole, not in part. So you can only imagine how hurt she must have been when she saw those text messages between a random woman and her own husband, and how the husband was going to divorce his wife for this other woman. Shannon didn't engage in any sort of infidelity following the decision to keep their marriage exclusive, so she was deeply hurt by this revelation. She was incredibly angry at Joshua for breaking her trust like that. Shannon decided right then and there she wasn't going to live with Joshua like this. She made plans to cut all ties with him, leave him, and move elsewhere. But this was easier said than done, and it was going to take time for her to find a new place to live. I'm assuming Shannon was busy with work and she rarely even saw Joshua to begin with, so maybe she just wanted to wait until she moved out or kicked him out. I'm not sure. But neither of them could have guessed that before Shannon would take that major step towards divorce, that she would come up missing. November 27th, 2014 was the fateful day, and in the early morning hours, Joshua arrived home, and coincidentally, Shannon was there too. According to Joshua, when the couple got home, they got into a very heated argument. I'm assuming that Shannon finally confronted Joshua about his cheating and trying to divorce her, and all of that for this other woman. The fighting lasted a while. It was verbal and heated, but it didn't really escalate. But something entirely different happened. After the two stopped fighting, they jumped into bed with each other. Joshua claimed that after the fighting died down, he asked Shannon if she wanted to have, quote, angry makeup intercourse with her. So this was completely out of left field, but weirdly enough, Shannon supposedly agreed. This story just keeps getting weirder and weirder. But there was one big problem with this arrangement. It was all a misunderstanding. See, Joshua says that Shannon thought that he had said breakup, not makeup, and that made her very angry. So when they were done and Joshua was expecting for things to just go back to normal, that wasn't what happened at all. Shannon was ready to pack up her bags and leave after their one final hoorah, so to speak. Soon after getting out of bed, she supposedly told Joshua that this would be the last time he would touch her, and that she was disgusted by him. She told him that she never wanted to see him again, and that she was done with him. Well, Joshua claimed that Shannon looked physically revolted when she touched him, and she repeatedly told him that she hated him. Shannon really let everything out. She claimed that she regretted ever marrying him and that she didn't even need him anymore, and that she was disgusted and surprised by the fact that he would leave her, his wife, for this other woman. Well, this was the final straw for Joshua, apparently, because he suddenly saw red. He forgot all about letting his frustration out between the sheets, and all he wanted to do now was make Shannon stop talking. Well, soon enough, Shannon had said her piece, and she just left. Supposedly, she had to leave for Edmonton for a work gig, so at that moment, she just grabbed her things and headed off for her job. But she could have never guessed that once she walked out that door, she'd be walking right into the abyss, because after that door latched, Shannon was never seen again. No one in Shannon's family knew what had happened to her. Shannon actually had plans to meet up with her brother Brett for dinner on November 30th at a local restaurant. The two had these plans for some time now, and they were finally going to catch up. Brett arrived at the restaurant and waited for minutes, then hours, but there was no sign of Shannon. Now, at that time, Brett didn't think too much of it, because if you remember, Shannon's family knew that she had a habit of forgetting things. Brett genuinely thought that his sister had forgotten about the dinner, so he just went back home. He thought that maybe Shannon had a last-minute work-related errand to run or something. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, why didn't Brett call Shannon to remind her? Well, he did, or rather, her dad did. Shannon's dad, David, texted Shannon about dinner with Brett, but again, Shannon didn't respond. Again, this was slightly weird, but not too much to make Shannon's family run straight for the police station. They knew Shannon. She was the one who had to be reminded at least 10 times just to go get dinner or go to a family gathering. Her work kept her very busy and in a constant loop, so her family didn't think much of it. But a day later, on December 1st, after her entire family blew up Shannon's phone and still got no response from her, Shannon's sister Erin decided to go to her house that she shared with Joshua. But she wasn't there either. Her car was parked out front, but Shannon was nowhere to be found. Erin then asked Joshua about Shannon's disappearance, and Joshua claimed that she'd gone to Edmonton for a work gig, but he hadn't seen her since she left. The problem was she'd accidentally left her phone at home when she left, so neither Joshua nor Erin were able to get a hold of her. But this detail set off several alarm bells for Erin. Even though Shannon was a bit of a scatterbrain, she wouldn't leave for work without her phone. She wasn't going to work in the city, she was going to another place hundreds of miles away. She would have had her phone on her. Well, after trying to reach Shannon with no luck, her family finally reported her missing on the evening of December 1st, 2014. The police were alarmed, to say the least. Shannon was last seen 3 days ago, and still no one had heard from her, not even her husband. That crucial window of time was already up. If Shannon hadn't come back home, then where was she? Was she out blowing off steam? Was she in trouble? What had happened? Well, the police decided to look into the family first, and they went straight to Joshua because he was the last person to have seen her alive. According to Joshua, he'd come home in the early hours of November 27th. He claimed that he talked to Shannon for a bit before going to bed, and when he woke up, she was gone. He claimed he didn't worry about it too much, and he assumed that they'd just get reacquainted when she got back from her Edmonton gig. All in all, he was completely unfazed by her disappearance and lack of communication. Not once did he ever mention anything to the police about their fight, or about her just flat walking out that night. Even when Joshua found Shannon's ringing phone in one of her jean pockets, he didn't bat an eye. He told the police the same thing he told Erin, that she must have just forgotten it when she left for the work gig. The police looked into Shannon's phone activity soon after, and they found out that she was at home in the early morning hours of November 27th. But after that, there was literally nothing. Shannon's bank account was also radio silent. But during the investigation, the police came across some very crucial information that immediately put them on high alert. It was Joshua's dating profile on several dating sites. What surprised the police even more was the fact that it was an active dating profile. According to what the police knew, Joshua was the loving and caring husband who was, by now, equally as worried for Shannon as everyone else. But now, this detail stuck out like a sore thumb. Why does a husband, whose wife is missing, mind you, have an active dating profile? Well, this was the key to the Pandora's box that was Shannon and Joshua's relationship. Their open relationship, to be exact. The police definitely did not know about this. They didn't know that Joshua and Shannon were seeing other people while married. So the police decided to bring in all of Shannon's beaus for an interview. They wanted to know if any of these men had something to do with Shannon's disappearance, but nothing came up. They were all ex-boyfriends who broke up amicably, the most recent one being Ian, and they all had airtight alibis. So no, this wasn't the case of a scorned lover getting back at Shannon. The police also looked into any possible stalkers too, though. Now, even though Shannon was not a superstar hotshot voice actress who was booked all year round, she was still in that industry, and there was a chance that someone could be fixated on her, and maybe that went unnoticed until just now. But this all also led to a dead end. There was literally not a single ounce of a clue that could suggest that someone was bothering Shannon or messing with her. She was not being followed, and no one from her friend circle or close family knew anything about a stalker. But finally, something clicked for the police, and they were honestly surprised that they let it slip, because the person they locked their sights on was right in front of them from day one. Shannon's husband, Joshua Burgess. The police went to talk to Joshua again, but this time he had a hard time recalling the events of the night that Shannon was last seen. His memory was fuzzy, and he had a hard time dishing out the details. This was really weird for the police. In most cases, spouses, husbands in this case, try to cooperate with the police as much as they can. They remember every single detail, from the clothes their wives were wearing to what they had for dinner the night before. So Joshua conveniently not remembering anything was a red flag. Well, this prompted the police to get a search warrant for the house that Shannon lived in with Joshua. It was July 8th of 2015, and the police visited Joshua and presented the search warrant for his house, his phone, and his car. But Joshua wasn't letting the investigators in. He was locked inside the house, and the detectives were trying to convince Joshua to open the door to be let in. Within no time, detectives noticed a change in Joshua's tone. He was very hiccupy and emotional, and he finally confessed from behind the closed door that he murdered his wife. The police finally had their confession and their guy, but they needed Joshua to come out. So detectives kept Joshua busy from the other side of the door, asking multiple questions and trying to get Joshua out of the house. This went on for about 2 hours, and finally, after 2 hours, the front door opened, and it was a mad scene. Joshua was wearing only his underwear, and there was a wound on his neck. Joshua had tried to end his own life inside the house, but he was unsuccessful. The wound was superficial, so he was taken to a local hospital and treated. And after that, he was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. The police knew that Joshua had murdered his wife, but now they needed all the details. Well, Joshua finally spilled everything about that night that Shannon lost her life, and it all tied back to that terrible fight that they had before Shannon walked out that door for the job in Edmonton. Well, it turns out there was no job in Edmonton, and Shannon also never walked out the door that night. See, after the two had their strange little rendezvous in the sheets and the whole misunderstanding about makeup or breakup took place, their argument devolved into something sinister. Harsh words were thrown around like candy on Halloween, and Joshua had finally had enough. According to Joshua, Shannon just wouldn't stop yelling. She was so incredibly disgusted by Joshua's affair, and she wouldn't let him hear the end of it, especially after finding out that he believed they were making up instead of breaking up. She just kept shouting, berating Joshua, and he felt like he couldn't take another word. He just wanted the yelling to stop, and no amount of begging was getting through to her. So he took matters into his own hands. Joshua put his hands over Shannon's mouth and muffled her words, but that wasn't enough. Shannon was still struggling and spewing her hatred for him, so Joshua took things to the next level. He used his bare hands to steal her life, and when that wasn't enough, he used his own belt to finish the job. Joshua had murdered his own wife in their own bed that they just shared together minutes before, all because Shannon was hurt and betrayed by him. Because Joshua wanted his other woman more than Shannon, and because Shannon wouldn't let her husband fool her like that. This was the price Shannon had to pay, her life. She was now gone, and nothing would be the same from this point on. After the horrible deed, Joshua loaded Shannon's body into a huge Rubbermaid container, and then he eventually buried her in the backyard of their house. He told the detectives about everything, about the fight, every last detail. The rough and passionate roll in the sheets, the makeup breakup thing, Shannon lashing out at Joshua, and finally Joshua killing Shannon just to get her to stop talking. He told them everything. During the interrogation, Joshua was seen breaking down multiple times. He claimed he shouldn't have done it. He should have tried to stop it. But he was overcome with so much anger that he just wanted Shannon to stop talking. And in the end, he took her life. Following Joshua's confession, he led the police to the backyard where Shannon's body was buried. In 2 weeks following the first visit from the police, Shannon's body was found under a pile of twigs, cement blocks, dirt, and branches. When Shannon's family finally got to know about Shannon's body being found, that too in the same home she shared with Joshua, they were honestly in utter disbelief. They couldn't believe that Joshua, someone who Shannon loved so much, and the person they treated like a son, was their daughter's killer. Joshua was charged with second-degree murder. Finally, 2 years after Joshua's interrogation, his trial was to be held, and he initially pleaded not guilty but changed his plea at the last minute, a day before his trial to be exact. So in December of 2017, he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. At the sentencing, the benches were filled with Shannon's loved ones and family, and they were devastated at the loss of their daughter. They couldn't even imagine that someone who vowed to protect and honor Shannon for the rest of his life was the person who stole the life from her, all because he didn't want her to leave, even though he was actively cheating on her. At the sentencing, Joshua took the stand and addressed the court as well as Shannon's loved ones by saying, quote, "I'm very sorry for the vows that I made. that I promised to look after her, no matter what the circumstances were. I failed her in that. He further said, "I'm so very sorry for that, and I'm so very sorry that I didn't say something earlier." Shannon's family is in a very painful state. They lost their bubbly, funny, and gorgeous Shannon. She was the light of their lives, a best friend, a daughter, and just a human being with so much to look forward to. Their marriage had its very obvious problems, yes, but Shannon always tried to play by the rules that they had set. It was Joshua alone who violated that trust, and Joshua alone who stole the life of an innocent woman who was just doing her best to get her marriage back on track. She confronted her husband, the real wrongdoer in the first place, but that cost her greatly. And it doesn't get much more depressing than this. Interestingly, it wasn't the open relationship that led to everything falling apart, at least not directly. It was more so that Joshua ultimately was just wearing a mask around the people that he held closest. He never let his true self show, at least not until it was far too late. And now Shannon is gone, her family's in pieces, and no amount of years given to a monster like Joshua will make Shannon come back or let her family hear her beautiful or upbeat voice ever again. She's gone forever, and meanwhile, Joshua is still here. Her family is still here, but not Shannon. In July of 1996, Blair Adams, a quiet Canadian construction worker, suddenly withdrew his life savings, abandoned his car at an airport, and crossed the United States in what appeared to be a frantic escape. Just days later, he was found murdered in a Tennessee hotel parking lot. Money scattered around the crime scene with no signs of a robbery and no clear motive. But what or who was Blair running from? And why did he lose his life after seemingly finding safety? Well, Blair Adams lived in Surrey, British Columbia, and he worked at his stepdad's construction company as a foreman. At one point in 1995, he went to Frankfurt, Germany to pick up a construction project. And there he met a German woman, and they soon got into a relationship. Blair was defined by his coworkers as very abrasive and confrontational, and would get into physical altercations with people. But his girlfriend, the German woman, remembered him as being a kind person and a gentleman. But regardless of his abrasiveness, Blair had other demons too, and one of the most potent ones was his alcohol addiction. Blair was a heavy drinker in the past. He'd stopped and was sober for about 2 years and was attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. But Blair had an amazing support system. His family was there for him every step of the way and tried their best to help him in whatever way they could. But for some time, things were looking up for Blair. He was managing his anger. He was good at his work, and things seemed to be going pretty well. But that wouldn't last for too long, because out of the blue, Blair started to act really weird. And from there, things only took a downward turn. Until 1996, things were pretty good for Blair. He'd been sober, he was attending his AA meetings, and it was working normally. But for some odd reason, by the summer of 1996, friends and family started to notice a very drastic change in Blair. He was becoming more and more paranoid. He would skip his AA meetings and would not go no matter how much he was struggling. He was starting to get really scared for his life, and he was also losing his touch at work. He would make little mistakes all the time, and at the end of his shift, he'd forget to lock the site up before leaving. And this didn't just happen once, it was happening often. What was even more bizarre was the fact that he would eventually quit his job without even collecting his paycheck. I don't think anyone else would forget such a thing, but here Blair was constantly looking over his shoulder, being very jumpy and anxious, and forgetting things. Things were subtle at first, but then friends and family started to notice this change too, and they asked Blair what was wrong. Blair's family was genuinely worried for him. They thought that Blair was spiraling due to alcoholism, and they tried to communicate their worries with Blair and reassured him that they were here for him and he could lean on them. Blair's mom was right by his side and tried her best to get her son to relax and tell her what was bothering him, but Blair wouldn't go into much detail. Even Blair's girlfriend was worried for him. The only thing that Blair had told his girlfriend was that he was worried for his life. Apparently, some workers of his had returned from Germany, and he feared that they were now after him. I'm assuming Blair must have gotten into a fight or altercation with these coworkers during this time in Germany when doing construction. and now, for whatever reason, they had it out for him. Now, I'm not 100% sure about this though, because Blair didn't really go into any details, so keep in mind that's purely a guess on my part, not a fact. But Blair also told his mom that he was scared that someone was spreading rumors about him. What rumors exactly? Well, again, your guess is as good as mine. But then he dropped a bombshell on his friends and family. In July of 1996, Blair was genuinely scared for his life, and he even told his family that someone was going to kill him. This is one very scary thing to say and to hear, but we don't know anything about it other than this, so there's that. So Blair's behavior was a complete 180 from before. He was now suddenly so paranoid that he told people close to him that someone was out for his blood, and that weird rumors were being spread about him. Blair's family was honestly really worried for him. They obviously wanted him safe and sound, but they also wanted him to stop losing his mind over these things. But Blair was having none of that. Turns out he had a plan in mind, and he was going to act on it, and soon. On July 5th, 1996, Blair went to his local bank and withdrew all of the money from his account. He also made a beeline for a safety deposit box and emptied that too. So he had cash, gold, silver, and platinum jewelry on him, and then he didn't look back. Instead of going back home, Blair took a ferry that was going to take him from Victoria, British Columbia to Seattle, Washington. He was fleeing his home in Surrey, British Columbia, and going to the United States. But he was unsuccessful, because he immediately got cornered by immigration officials, and they were suspicious of Blair, mainly because he had so much money on him. The officials thought that he was trying to illegally enter the US as an illegal substance trafficker or some kind of courier. Well, he was arrested for that, and he was found guilty and convicted of illegally entering the US, along with illegal substance and assault charges. And following this, he was denied entry to the US in the future. We don't know if there was any real truth to these charges though, but Blair was charged nonetheless. But Blair didn't back off. He needed to get out of British Columbia for whatever reason, and he was going to do it. 4 days later, on July 9th of 1996, the Canadian Border Patrol caught Blair trying to cross the border again, on foot now, at the Pacific Highway border crossing. Blair was slightly injured, and he had scratches on his arms, hands, and legs, but he was relentless. The Border Patrol officers immediately detained him, and he was arrested again. The reason he was arrested was that he matched the description of a man who was involved in a car theft, and the police had found the stolen car abandoned near the Pacific Highway border crossing, the same place that Blair was now at, and on foot. But it turned out that Blair had nothing to do with this incident, and he was eventually free to go, because the officers didn't have enough evidence to keep him there. Even though Blair denied having anything to do with that car theft, though, we're not sure who did it, and if the perpetrator was ever caught or not. But that same day, Blair managed to get his hands on a Nissan Altima. He'd rented the car from Vancouver International Airport, and get this, he somehow entered the US without getting caught this time. This was just wild. Borders are and were tightly controlled, but somehow he just drove his way in. He then drove the car to Seattle, and there he bought a round-trip ticket to Frankfurt, Germany, at the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Now, it's possible that Blair was going to Germany to meet his girlfriend, or he was staying there. But when the police reached out to said girlfriend following this incident, she was not aware that Blair was coming to Germany. So why didn't Blair tell his girlfriend that he had plans to come to Germany? Is it possible he was trying to keep it hush-hush until he got to Germany so that no one would know where he was going? I mean, according to Blair, his life was in danger, so I doubt that he wanted to tell anyone what his next step was going to be. So I don't know, it's just an assumption. But even after all of this struggle and going through the trouble of buying the ticket to Germany, Blair never actually boarded the flight. Instead, he bought a ticket for Washington, D.C., and he landed at Dulles Airport at around 6:25 a.m. He then rented a Toyota Camry at the airport, and then he was en route to Tennessee. I know there's a lot of movement, and it may be a little hard to keep up, but just bear with me. So while Blair was driving a Toyota Camry down US Route 250 in Troy, Virginia, he wasn't looking when he was reversing his car, and that caused him to crash right into the front of another car. Damage was minor, and no one was hurt. The driver came out to confront Blair, and according to him, he seemed nice but was in a hurry. So after this mess, Blair made his way to Knox County, Tennessee, and he arrived there sometime on the evening of July 10th. He was approximately 500 miles away from Washington, D.C. by this point. Now, remember, Blair had a Toyota Camry with him, but this was when something strange happened. Blair stopped at a gas station on Strawberry Plains Pike at around 5:30 p.m., and he called in a car repairman to take a look at his car. Apparently, Blair couldn't get into the car, and he seemed very agitated. When the repairman looked at the car key, he was shocked to see the key belonged to a Nissan, not a Toyota. He then asked Blair to check his pockets for the key to the Camry, but Blair wouldn't comply. The repairman thought that Blair had gone crazy. Why would he refuse to look in his pockets? And how had he mixed up the keys? Because didn't he know what car he was driving? And how did he get this far if he didn't have a key for the Camry? All of this was really bizarre, and I'm sure the repairman was a little bit on edge after this really weird incident. But things were about to get much more strange. After all was said and done, the repairman arranged to have the Toyota Camry towed to a local repair shop, and he was nice enough to give Blair a lift, and he eventually dropped him off at a Fairfield Inn in Knoxville on Cracker Barrel Lane. There, Blair was captured on CCTV, and he was seen just wandering around the hotel for almost 40 minutes. And after this, Blair finally went inside and got a room for $100, and then he just turned around, exited the lobby, and went outside the hotel without ever taking his change. It was eventually found out that he never even went into the room that he had purchased either. I honestly don't understand what he's doing. First, that ticket to Germany, and then this hotel room. Well, he was later seen at a Cracker Barrel by two women, and this was near the hotel where he had booked the room. But this would be the last time anyone would see Blair alive. On July 11th, 1994, a day after Blair arrived in Knox County, Tennessee, construction workers started to come in for work at around 7:30 a.m. in a parking lot of an under-construction Country Inn and Suites hotel at 7471 Crosswood Boulevard. It was on the other side of the Strawberry Plains Pike Interstate 40 interchange, and across from the Fairfield Inn where Blair had booked that room. As soon as the workers reached the parking lot, though, they were stopped dead in their tracks, because on the ground lay the body of a man. He had injuries to his forehead, abrasions, and cuts all over his body, and he was partially dressed. His pants, socks, and shoes were found by his side, and the shirt the man was wearing was open at the front. The police were called immediately. When the officers examined the body up close, they discovered that the man had a black duffel bag, and in the bag were maps, receipts, and a fanny pack that contained 160 grams of gold bars, gold and platinum coins, jewelry, keys, and a pair of sunglasses. Then scattered around the man's body were German, Canadian, and US dollar bills. The body was soon identified as 31-year-old Blair Adams. Blair's body was taken for an autopsy, and it was found that the cause of his passing was a blow to the stomach, which had led to sepsis and abdominal perforation. Certain injuries also pointed to the fact that Blair was taken advantage of, which was incredibly bizarre, but there was no DNA evidence to confirm it. But what is certain is that Blair struggled a lot during his last moments. He'd sustained defensive wounds and abrasions, and he tried his best to fend off the attacker, but he was unsuccessful. The only thing that was somewhat useful was a strand of long hair that was found in Blair's hand, and it could have been the attacker's or it could have been nothing, but that was literally the only piece of evidence found on Blair's body. The police ruled out robbery right away because Blair still had $4,000 on him, and that doesn't include the gold bars and jewelry found on him. If someone wanted to rob Blair, then why didn't they take anything? It was also a crime of perverse nature, possibly, so none of this made sense. The only witnesses were the two women who claimed to have seen Blair with the man at the Cracker Barrel. The man looked like he was talking to Blair, but after that, the women saw nothing out of the ordinary. The police even released a composite sketch of the man seen talking to Blair, but there was no progress in the case. In a 2010 interview, 14 years after Blair's murder, the Knoxville Police Department revealed that they never received a credible lead in this case, not one, even after all this time. So what could have possibly happened to Blair? There's literally nothing to go off of in this case. It's as if one day Blair was scared for his life and he took all of his money and went on the run. But why? A lot of people speculate that it was a fun time gone wrong. See, the area Blair was in was known to be a hotspot for adult work, especially the hotel where Blair bought a room and the truck stop nearby. So, was this the case? Honestly, we don't know. The only witness, if you can even call it that, was a security guard from another business nearby who claimed to have heard a scream at around 3:30 a.m., just a few hours before Blair's body was found. So, who took the life of Blair? Who was threatening him? Who was spreading rumors about him? And what ultimately caused him to flee the country and go on the run? Well, Savannah was a young mother of 4. Naturally, she was exhausted, but hopeful, and finally stepping out for a rare night of freedom. But before the sun rose, Savannah Spurlock would vanish into the darkness, leaving behind a chilling trail of unanswered questions, strange behavior, and a final eerie phone call that haunts her family to this day. But how could an ordinary night out spiral into one of Kentucky's most unsettling mysteries? Stay with me, because the truth is far more disturbing than anyone imagined. Savannah Spurlock was born in Richmond, Kentucky. She was defined as a bright and energetic soul, and she attended Madison Central High School, graduated in 2014, and then attended Eastern Kentucky University. Savannah loved her job as a lifeguard, as well as her job in the restaurant business. Her work life was going pretty well, all things considered, but her parents had gotten divorced years before, and now Savannah was going through a rough patch in her relationship with her dad, Cecil. Now, Cecil was a military dad through and through. Unfortunately, he was also wheelchair-bound. Obviously, he loved Savannah, but he also wanted her to be financially responsible and be able to stand on her own 2 feet. Even though Savannah wasn't a wild child and neglectful by any means, she wasn't opposed to partying and hanging out with friends every now and then. So Cecil thought that things were getting out of hand, and so he decided to cut Savannah off financially. And this was a major blow to her. Savannah was living her typical college life, and in her freshman year, she aced her studies. She was a very good student. But this was the time when Savannah's life changed completely. She found out she was pregnant. We don't know anything about the baby's dad, but what we do know is that he wasn't in the picture. Savannah was going to give birth to a baby as a single mom. Well, when the time came, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy that she named Noah. And even though being a young, single, college-going mom was hard, Savannah pushed through. But not to sugarcoat anything, it was definitely hard for her to juggle all of her responsibilities. She was also dating a guy by the name of Shaq Smith, and sometime later, Savannah got pregnant again, and this time, 20-year-old Savannah gave birth to another boy and named him Jace. Now, taking care of one child is hard enough as a 20-year-old mom, but now there were 2 in the equation. So Savannah decided that she would drop out of college and focus on her kids first, and then afterward she could rejoin. This time around, though, Savannah had the support of her boyfriend, Shaq, who honestly seemed like a pretty decent guy. He was there every step of the way and even took care of Noah just the same, even though he wasn't his biological father. Savannah switched between working at a restaurant and as a lifeguard during this time because, well, money was tight. Savannah was struggling, as I'm sure you could imagine, but this is when things took another turn. Savannah found out she was pregnant yet again, and this time she was going to have twins. So now Savannah was a mom of 4 little kids. 4. She gave birth to 2 twins, Zane and Zuri. And just to put things into perspective, Savannah was 22, and she now had a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and 2 infant twins. Savannah was definitely dealing with a huge responsibility, and on top of that, she was struggling financially. Savannah's mom and Shaq tried their best to be there for her and help pull her out of this weird mental place that she was in. But I don't think any of us, other than those who have lived through this themselves, could ever imagine what an incredibly terrifying time this was in Savannah's life. But as with most mothers that find themselves in situations like this, I can't help but believe that Savannah still wouldn't have had it any other way. But needless to say, every mother needs a break every once in a while. And for Savannah, this came when a couple of her friends invited her to a night out. No kids, no spouses, just a girls' night. Savannah could not have been happier about the invitation, and she was counting down the days until that evening arrived. But little did Savannah know that she would also be counting down the final days of her life. So, it was January 3rd, 2019, and Savannah was at home with her kids, and her mom, Ellen, was there to help out too. Ellen wanted her daughter to go have some fun. She was 23 and had a huge responsibility on her shoulders, and she just dropped out of college for her kids and worked tirelessly through shifts to make ends meet. So, in short, Savannah deserved the night out in Ellen's mind. So Ellen encouraged Savannah to go get ready and go out and have fun with her friends. Ellen would look after the kids, and all would be good. So Savannah got ready, and she hopped into the car with two of her friends, a man and a woman, and they all went to a bar called The Other Bar in Lexington, Kentucky. Savannah and her group were having a great time, but when it came to deciding where their next stop was to continue their night out, Savannah and her female friend got into a bit of an argument. I'm assuming Savannah and her friend must have wanted to go two different places, and that's how the disagreement started. But it got to the point where Savannah's friends actually left, just straight up walked off. Now, at this point, the only person at the bar was this male friend, and he too decided to leave because he had work in the morning or something. So Savannah's friends left a tipsy Savannah alone at this bar. You can already tell things are not about to go down well. But Savannah was apparently having a good time. She was in no rush to leave, and she decided to stay at the bar, drinking and talking to strangers until 2:30 in the morning. She was actually seen on CCTV leaving the bar at around 2:30 a.m. on January 4th, and she was seen with three men. Now, we don't know who these men are, but Savannah was leaving with them. 15 minutes later at 2:45 a.m., Savannah's mom, Ellen, got a FaceTime call, and it was actually Savannah. She looked okay, minus the tipsy state that she was in, and she promised Ellen that she'd be home soon. The only thing Ellen could tell was that Savannah was sitting in a car. The two hung up, but tragically, Savannah wouldn't come back as she promised. Morning came, and Ellen woke up, but she realized that Savannah hadn't made it home. She wasn't in her bedroom, she wasn't with her kids, and she wasn't picking up her phone. If Savannah was staying somewhere with a friend, then she would have let her mom know. This was very out of left field for Savannah. She wasn't your typical 23-year-old party child. She was a mom of four. She knew that she had to be home for her kids. So after getting no answer from Savannah or her friends, Ellen decided to report Savannah missing. First in Lexington, where Savannah was last seen, and then in Richmond, where the investigation kicked off for the missing 23-year-old mom of four. The police in Lexington were of zero help when Savannah was reported missing, because they instructed her family to wait 24 hours to report her missing. It was actually the Richmond police who took Savannah's disappearance seriously. She was a mom, and she distinctly told Ellen that she'd be home in no time. So where was she now? Her family was very anxious and worried for her. So the investigators started with the last place where Savannah was seen, the other bar. The police checked their surveillance footage, and sure enough, they saw Savannah leaving with two men in the footage. It was actually three men, but only two were visible in this particular footage. She seemed comfortable around the men. It wasn't like she was being followed. But from the footage, it was impossible to identify these men. The only lead the investigators had was that one of the men Savannah was with was seen driving a black pickup truck. So the detectives turned to the public for help. They made all of this information public, and they wanted anyone and everyone with valuable information to come forward. The search for Savannah stretched out for weeks and then months, but nothing came up. In the meantime, someone did come forward, and they finally knew who this black pickup truck belonged to. And it was actually the Girard County police officer, Evan Preston, who saw that same truck cruising down Highway 52, and he tailed the truck for a while. Like, seriously, props to this guy, because he was there at the right place at the right time and just so happened to pass by that truck after hearing about it in a report recently. So with this lead, the investigators were able to figure out who these men were that Savannah was seen with. The men were approached by the police, and then they were called in for questioning. They looked like the last people to have seen Savannah, and she drove away from the bar in their vehicle, so they had to have known something. And the crazy thing is, these men were actually very forthcoming with the police. They gave them all of the information about what happened the night that Savannah left the bar with them. And one name kept popping up over and over in their conversation. It was David Sparks, man number 3 in the footage. So the two men talked to the police, and they came clean that they had met Savannah that night, along with David, at the bar, when her friends had left her alone to fend for herself. The guys and Savannah chatted and drank together for a bit, and then they decided to leave the bar and go to David's house to continue partying and drinking there. Savannah took off with these men, who were literal strangers, to another stranger's house for drinks. This is not safe at all, no matter what the outcome is. It's clear to see that Savannah was not in her right mind that evening, likely owed to the amount of alcohol that she'd been drinking. Alone, mind you. I'm not saying this as a way of victim blaming by any means, but guys, if you're already drunk, understand that it may be time to stop. I know that everyone wants to hang out and have a good time every once in a while, but be safe. Don't be at bars alone. Don't drink to the point that you completely lose your wits about you. Be smart and be vigilant, because there's a lot of evil people in this world. But anyway, Savannah and the two guys reached David's house, and right off the bat, the two guys got a very weird vibe from David. He was looking very inappropriately at Savannah, and even made advances towards her when she was clearly drunk and couldn't even think straight. I can't imagine how Savannah must have felt, being drunk and either knowing or not knowing that this guy was trying to make a move on her. The guys with Savannah also saw this, and they told the detectives that David definitely looked like he had plans for Savannah, for lack of a better word. But what did they do next? The two guys left David alone with Savannah. These guys could clearly see that David was behaving inappropriately towards her, and the best thing they thought to do was leave. I will never understand how so many people are just able to stand idly by and watch people get taken advantage of, or watch people be victimized in one way or another. But that's exactly what they did. They left Savannah there in the hands of a predator. Then a couple days later, when news of Savannah's disappearance was on TV, these guys came across it, and that's when they were struck with that sinking feeling. The young woman who is currently missing was the same woman they'd left with David that night, and realization hit these guys like a truck. And one of them actually called David to ask whether he knew anything about Savannah or not, because according to the guy's story now, David was the last person to see Savannah, and he actually was with Savannah until she went missing. So when the guy inquired about Savannah, David said he knew nothing about her. Basically, David said that at some point after the guys left, he fell asleep on the couch while Savannah took his bed. And a couple hours later, he was shaken awake by none other than Savannah, who wanted to ask what his address was. In David's mind, Savannah was calling someone and they were coming to pick her up. So David gave her the address and just went back to sleep. The next morning, when he woke up, Savannah was gone. David assumed that she'd left with whoever came to pick her up, and that was that. So by this point, the investigators were very suspicious of David, but they wanted to find him and get his side of the story. So the police found out that he lived in Girard County, which is about 40 minutes away from the bar that Savannah went to with her friends, and they wanted to have a little chat with the man himself. David was called for an interrogation, and he basically told the same story that I just told you. How the guys left Savannah at his home, how he was the perfect gentleman and allowed Savannah to sleep on his bed, how Savannah woke him up for the address, and then she was gone the next day. But the investigators knew better than to believe his story. There was just something unsettling about David, especially when the detectives asked certain questions. The way David answered was very eerie. The investigators straight up asked David if he thought if Savannah was alive, and he admitted he'd pondered the possibility that she may not be. Detectives had no idea just how right he would prove to be. So with that, the interrogation was over. And even though the police felt a certain way about David, they couldn't arrest him yet. But he was a suspect in Savannah's case, and because of this, a search warrant was issued in no time to flip David's house upside down for any clues. The search extended from the house all the way to the farmland that surrounded the house. This farmland actually belonged to David's parents. They grew strawberries and a bunch of other things on this land, and it was pretty vast. The investigators searched the entire house, and they even checked the farmland outside, but nothing came up. They had cadaver dogs, officers, and search teams going in and out of the house, but it was unfruitful. Savannah's family was losing hope. It had been a long time since she was last seen or heard from, and they were dreading where she could be. The chances of finding Savannah alive were getting slimmer and slimmer as each day passed. The detectives were also at a loss in this case. They knew that they were at the right place. They knew that David was suspicious, and something definitely happened that could explain Savannah's disappearance. But they just needed that smoking gun, that bullseye if you will, to hit their target and crack this very confusing case. Well, the police's relentlessness paid off because in early April of 2019, almost 4 months after Savannah disappeared, they conducted another search at David's house. And well, let's just say they found a lot of things this time. Firstly, there was a mark on David's closet door, and when the detectives used luminol, the whole thing lit up. It was exactly what you think it was. The stain was tested, and it matched Savannah's DNA. The investigators also uncovered a very strange note written by David. It read, quote, "I simply don't care at all. I feel no true love for anything, now that I know what I really am. I see a greater need to hide my true self, but I just want to be free. I stay in a constant state of aggression, and nothing seems to help anymore." It continued by saying, quote, "How do you look your mother in the eyes and tell her you're born a psychopath? That she gave birth to a monster, someone who wouldn't care a bit to take the life of another human." This is so disturbing, and I'm not sure why the police didn't find this earlier. When they asked David about this letter, he said that he'd written this letter 2 years ago when he was rejected by a woman. The letter itself wasn't dated or anything, so who really knows when it was written? But judging by how this case unfolded, it definitely shed light on David and who he was as a person. And it was revealed that he suffered from depression and anger issues for a long time. Then, the investigators checked David's cell phone, mainly his social media, and they stumbled upon his Snapchat. And there he was having conversations with friends about Savannah's case. His search history also showed a lot about him searching for any progress in Savannah's case, and he looked very invested, as if he wanted to see whether the detectives found something progressive about the woman's disappearance or not. Well, a few months passed, and the investigators kept their eye on David, who was getting very irritated at this point, and was very vocal about the police trying to supposedly pin the crime on him. The investigators were just waiting for that perfect moment for David to crack and spill everything. But before that could happen, someone else came to the police, and this led them straight to David's farmland outside his home. Someone close to David had called the detectives to let them know they'd found something very bizarre. See, it was actually David's dad who called the police. He was working on the strawberry patch outside their home one day, and a very distinct and offensive odor invaded his nose. David's dad was stunned. He'd never smelled anything like this before, and he just knew that he couldn't keep quiet about this. So he called the police, and that was what led them to conduct a more thorough search outside the house, this time all around the property. Interestingly enough, the investigators had searched this area the first time too, and while they were wandering around the strawberry patch on the farmland, the investigators noticed that David was laser focused on one particular place. He was intensely staring at a certain section of the strawberry patch, and only when officers moved away from that place did David finally take a breath. Now, looking back, the detectives knew that they'd missed something really big. But not this time. A team was brought in at midnight on July 10th of 2019, and the ground was dug, and within no time they found something. It was the body of a woman, and tragically, it was 23-year-old Savannah Spurlock, and she was no longer alive. She was found in a shallow grave outside David's home, just below that strawberry patch, and with her body they dug up a gray rug. And see, this rug was the exact same one as what was found in David's house when the police searched it earlier on. And it was later found out that David had asked his sister where she got the rug from, and it turns out he bought a second one because he used the first one to wrap up Savannah. Looking back, the investigators realized that they were right on top of Savannah's body the first time around, but it took them months to discover the missing piece in Savannah's case. By this point, medical examiners were unable to determine what exactly had happened to her, but they knew one thing. Savannah endured a lot before she lost her life. But what that was, we'll never know, because investigators never figured it out, and David won't tell. When Savannah's family got to know about this tragic discovery, their reactions were a mix of relief and also insurmountable sadness. They'd been searching for Savannah for months, and even though they were mentally preparing themselves for the worst, it still knocked them hard when they found out. They were relieved, to have finally been able to lay Savannah to rest in a familiar place, but the loss was immeasurable. Finally, thanks to David's dad, his son, David Sparks, was arrested for murdering Savannah Spurlock. David initially pleaded not guilty, but later in December of 2020, he changed his plea to guilty to possibly get a lesser sentence and save his skin. Initially, if proven guilty in trial, David was to get a life sentence in prison, but with his plea deal, he was only sentenced to 50 years. He's currently incarcerated at the Southeast State Correctional Facility in Kentucky. Since we don't have an official cause for Savannah's passing, we can only assume what happened to her, and it's believed that David tried to make a pass at Savannah, and when she left alone with him, that was when things went downhill. It's possible Savannah put up a fight, but David eventually subdued her, and in the process took her life. Then it's believed that David buried Savannah's body as well as the rug outside in the farmland and dusted his hands off. You have to remember, Savannah just wanted a nice night out with her friends after such a long time spent raising her little ones. She just wanted that one night to let off some steam and rehabilitate herself, for lack of a better word. But one dumb argument with a friend squashed those chances. Then soon after, a decision to leave with people who she believed were her new friends ended with her losing her life. Looking back, there are a lot of what-ifs in this case. What if Savannah's friends hadn't left her alone at the bar? What if Savannah had gone home instead of sticking around at the bar? What if she hadn't agreed to go to David's house with those men? What if the guys hadn't left Savannah alone with David and they had just taken her home? In hindsight, the events that transpired in this case, they're not the fault of one individual. It's just a hodgepodge of mistakes and bad decisions. I'm sure Savannah wasn't out looking for trouble because, in all honesty, whoever does? I'm sure the two men, as well as Savannah's friends, felt very guilty after they left her alone and drunk at that bar, and she ended up at David's house. But all that aside, David is the true villain in this story. Savannah was a great mom, as great as she could be given her age and circumstances. She was patching things up with her dad. She was literally trying her best to provide for her kids, and this shouldn't have happened to her. Did Savannah make some questionable decisions that fateful night? Absolutely. But again, who hasn't in their life? But does that justify what happened to her? Never. Now, these 4 children are left without a mother, all because one man couldn't keep his hands to himself. Heather Bogle was born in Rock Hill, South Carolina, but later the family moved to Ohio and settled down there. She attended Tiffin Columbian High School, from which she graduated in 2006. Heather also had a daughter named Mackenzie, whom she gave birth to in 2010. We don't know who the father was, whether he knew about the pregnancy or not, and whether he was supporting in her life or not. We just don't know, but regardless, Heather was a very happy single mom of an equally adorable little girl, and she absolutely loved her small family. At the time of the case, Heather actually worked at Whirlpool in Clyde, Sandusky County. It was a huge factory that made hundreds of thousands of home appliance parts, and Heather loved it there. But she also had dreams of entering the field of medicine one day. Shortly, she wanted to become a nurse, so at the time of the case, Heather had enrolled in some nursing courses and was quickly working towards her dream job. But while working at Whirlpool, something caught Heather's eye, or rather, someone. It was her co-worker at the Whirlpool factory, Carmela Badillo. No sooner than they met, Heather was falling head over heels for Carmela. After a while, the two went on a few dates, and before they knew it, they'd been dating each other for about a year. So Heather was at a good point in her life. She was working, she was in a relationship, she had a wonderful family, and she was studying to become a nurse. And she was also close to achieving that goal. But Heather's nice life was about to get shaken up. And in a very rapid turn of events, her life was about to take a very, very dark turn. So Heather and Carmela, after a year of dating, were on the verge of breaking up, and understandably, Heather took this very hard. Carmela was Heather's love, and while we don't know what led to the two breaking up, we only know that it was extremely painful. They were fighting constantly, to the point where certain words were spoken that just couldn't be taken back. All of this, for the most part, came out of nowhere. To those on the outside of their relationship, it seemed very much like everything was fine one minute, and then it wasn't. Well, Heather had to put her heartbreak on hold, because now she'd also failed one of her nursing exams. This meant that she had to retake the class she failed, which in turn meant she wouldn't be getting her nursing license. And she would be out even more money, putting her dream career on hold for that much longer. Life was really throwing lemons in Heather's way. Things were falling apart. And you know that feeling when things just don't work out in your professional life or your private life, and you're hit with that massive dose of hopelessness? Well, let's just say Heather was right at that spot during that time, right in the thick of it. She couldn't see her way out, and everywhere she turned, her life felt like a wreck. But Heather was tougher than you think. She was still standing tall, smiling, and going to work because, well, that's kind of what you have to do when life kicks you down. You just get back up and start over again and again and again. Heather was working her way through these curveballs, and despite everything she'd been going through, she was excited for what life had in store for her. But she didn't expect what happened next. It was April 9th of 2015, and for Heather, it was a workday that was coming to an end. And on this day, she clocked out of work at around 6 a.m., and she was ready to go home. Now, Heather usually worked the night shifts, and then when she got home to hit the hay, she'd wake up just in time to pick up her daughter, Mackenzie, from school that afternoon. On this particular day, Heather was seen on CCTV leaving the Whirlpool Clyde plant at about 6:17 a.m. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Heather didn't seem scared, no one sketchy was following her, but soon, Heather didn't show up to school to pick Mackenzie up. This was really odd. I mean, if anyone can tell you anything about Heather, it's the fact that she was a devoted mom. And I know even moms need breaks sometimes. But if Heather made some changes in plans, then she would have at least asked someone from her family to go and pick Mackenzie up. She definitely wouldn't have just left her daughter alone at school without telling someone that she wouldn't be able to pick her up. It just wasn't like her. This really worried everyone. And later that day, after not being able to reach Heather all day long, the 28-year-old single mom was finally reported missing. The police got down to searching for Heather, and within a day, they found something. But it would not be anything good. See, on April 10th, just a day after Heather had disappeared, her car was found. It was found really close to the Whirlpool plant where she worked, and it looked abandoned. The police were honestly dreading searching inside the car because, well, they just had a bad feeling. But bad feelings don't mean you just get to turn around and go the other way. And investigators knew what they had to do. As soon as they approached the car, it was an all-hands-on-deck situation. They were searching every square inch of this vehicle. But it took them only a matter of minutes to find what they were looking for. But certainly not what they had hoped for. As they popped the trunk lid of the vehicle, inside the trunk lay an unconscious, motionless, and battered Heather. She was tragically not breathing. But here's the thing. Heather looked different. Her previously beautiful long hair was chopped off, hacked even. It was done so haphazardly, and it didn't take a lot to realize someone had done it in anger and in fury. Heather was also wearing a ridiculously oversized Mickey Mouse shirt, and when the police lifted that shirt, they noticed there was much more to this horrific attack on Heather. It was worse than anyone expected, and it was such a brutal and horrific sight for the police. But what really made the whole situation all the more eerie was that the shirt had no holes in it, which you would think would be bizarre, considering she was attacked with a firearm. But the police soon realized that Heather was likely taken out elsewhere, and she was then placed in this Mickey Mouse shirt after the fact. This was just downright weird. What would be the purpose of this? Someone had taken their sweet time with Heather, post-mortem, and it was such an unsettling scene. But the bigger question was, who had done this to Heather, and why? Heather's case was taken over by a detective named Sean O'Connell. Now, typically, if I'm going to call out a detective's name, it's to commend them for what they've done, or to congratulate them on some sort of amazing effort they made to get a case solved. But that's not true this time. At the crime scene, the detectives tried to swab the entire car for any DNA evidence, and they did find it on Heather's body, her cuticles to be exact. But the weird thing is, I'm not sure how they did this because Heather's fingers weren't found with the rest of her body. But however this played out, there was DNA under her cuticles. This DNA becomes important later on, so just remember that for now. A toxicology report also stated that Heather had illegal substances in her system, but more on that later as well. Now, Detective Sean, the lead investigator in Heather's case, decided to speak to people around the area where Heather's car was found. It was found in the Somerton apartment complex, and from the looks of it, Heather had no business being there. But Sean had his eye on a suspect already. It was another single mom in the apartment complex. Her name was Kinona Bohr. She was 25, and what made her a prime suspect, or at least a person of interest in Heather's case, and in Sean's eyes, was the fact that A, she suspiciously and coincidentally owned a similar oversized Mickey Mouse shirt, similar to the one found on Heather's body, and B, a man named Omar Satchel was at Kinona's apartment and had already been arrested by Sean on firearm and home invasion charges. Oh, and C, Kinona had made some cryptic Facebook posts the same day Heather went missing. Now, Sean had associated Omar with stealing a firearm, apparently the same one used on Heather, and also with the white SUV that was seen between 1:30 a.m. and 3 a.m. in the same area where Heather's car was found. How much truth was in these associations, though? We don't know. It was all Sean's gut telling him this. Sean had also previously arrested Kinona's boyfriend and imprisoned him for 10 years on illegal substance charges. Also, when the police talked to Kinona, she was emotionless with her answers, as if she couldn't have cared less. So Sean thought that all this was suspicious. But also, Sean knew these people well, and he didn't trust them. But what about the DNA evidence? Well, this is where Sean thought that his spidey senses were enough and that he didn't need DNA to, confirm whether the people he's suspicious of are even the perpetrators or not. So when the DNA was eventually tested, it matched neither Kinona, Omar, nor the other guy Sean was suspicious of, by the name of Kayri Jeffrey. Not even Kinona's boyfriend's DNA matched the evidence found on Heather's body. But regardless, for the next year, Sean made the lives of these people a living hell. Kinona's home was raided. They were questioned ruthlessly, and even the public was frowning at Sean's actions, because whether any of these people were guilty or not, this all just seemed too excessive when Sean nor his team had any evidence against these people. I mean, the DNA evidence didn't even match up to them. They weren't the perpetrators, plain and simple. It was all Sean's theory about the firearm and the SUV being linked to Kinona and her gang. But Sean was relentless. I mean, it's one thing the detective is doing his or her job, but it's another to harass people, especially those who are proven innocent. Well, Sean wasn't the best detective on the block either. He had a pretty bad reputation for being a lousy detective, not following up on leads, and just making his way by bulldozing potential theories and leads with his own bright ideas. He basically loved pointing fingers at anyone that he didn't like and thought was suspicious in his eyes. The eyes of the law could go take a hike for all he cared. So you can tell he was a wonderful investigator, and Heather's case was in great hands. I don't even know why this guy was given the case in the first place, because this would all go on for 2 years. All the while, Heather's family was reeling from her loss, begging for answers, while Sean was insistent to keep barking up the wrong tree. Needless to say, her case was at a standstill, and it would take quite some time before investigators found another lead that would eventually send this case forward. After 2 years, new detectives were handed Heather's case, and they had to start from square one. Major Nick Kostopoulos, the new lead detective in Heather's case, was a breath of fresh air sent from police heaven. He was the person who should have handled the case from the start. First, Detective Nick revisited all the previous leads, and this time he actually ruled out people of interest using DNA evidence, which is the right way to do things. He re-questioned Carmela, as well as other people close to Heather, including her own brother with whom Heather had a really bad argument before her murder. But again, they were all cleared of suspicion. Then Nick checked on Heather's movement through her phone, as well as satellite data from Google, and lo and behold, he found something that Sean had totally missed all those years ago. Heather's phone had pinged near a trailer park that was just a couple minutes away from the Whirlpool factory where she worked. This was really odd. Who was Heather meeting at this trailer park? Well, when the police dug a bit more, they found out that a man by the name of Daniel Myers lived there. He worked with Heather at that same Whirlpool plant in Clyde. Moreover, he worked the same night shift as Heather, on the night that she went missing. But what would Heather have been doing at this man's house, especially when she was supposed to be going home and getting some sleep so that she could pick her daughter up later on? Well, detectives were about to find out. Daniel was called into the station for a round of questioning, and when detectives questioned him and asked if he knew Heather at all, he said that he knew who Heather was, but they rarely ever interacted. Daniel went on to say that he may have said a few words to Heather every 2 or 3 months or so. But when the detectives asked for a DNA swab, Daniel refused right away. It's not like he was obliged to give his DNA sample, but this hesitation and the fact that Heather's phone pinged close to his trailer were enough for the police to obtain a search warrant. Well, they did obtain that warrant, and this time, he couldn't say no to providing a DNA sample. When it was cross-matched with the one found on Heather's body, it was a 100% match. Daniel's DNA was found on Heather's body. What are the odds? Daniel, a man who worked with Heather but didn't know her personally and seldom even talked to her, had his DNA in her car and on her body. There was definitely more to Daniel than he was letting on. When the results came out, there was no more waiting. Honestly, it was a long time coming for the police as well as Heather's loved ones who wanted answers for why she was murdered so horrifically. Daniel Myers was immediately taken into custody, and he was charged with aggravated murder, aggravated assault, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. It turned out that Daniel, in fact, knew a lot about Heather. He was actually infatuated with her. In fact, on the day Heather disappeared and never came back home, it's believed that Daniel had caught Heather in a very vulnerable state. She had just failed her nursing board exam, and she was on the verge of a really bad breakup with the first woman that she ever really loved. So Daniel took advantage of this situation, and he persuaded Heather to go back with him to his apartment to vent about her problems. But that's not exactly what happened. See, when Daniel and Heather got to his trailer and took some illegal substances to help loosen up, that's when Daniel advanced towards Heather. Heather, clearly not interested in men, let alone Daniel, rejected his advances and in the process supposedly laughed at him for even making a pass at her. But these are just his words, so whether this is all true, we don't know. And even if it is true, we don't know the full context. Was it a friendly laugh, like, haha bro, I'm gay, what are you doing? Or was she ridiculing him? Well, it doesn't matter because whatever the intention was, Daniel wasn't about to let it slide, and he quite literally saw red. Daniel pounced on Heather, and he had one goal in mind, to finish Heather off for good. But Heather put up a fight. She fought hard to try and get Daniel off of her, but she was unsuccessful. She suffered a lot of defensive wounds on her arms, but Daniel wasn't letting up. And in the end, Daniel did a serious number on Heather, and finally used a firearm to finish the job. He then undressed her, placed her in that oversized Mickey Mouse shirt, and loaded Heather's body into the trunk of her own car and abandoned it near the Whirlpool plant. Daniel literally murdered an innocent woman just because she didn't want to reciprocate his advances. And also, I want to talk about this laugh that Daniel found oh so mocking. I want to disclaim that this is just what I personally believe happened. Heather was not looking for a relationship. It's what her family said time and time again. I personally think that maybe when Daniel came on to Heather, she didn't know what to do, and she gave him this awkward, hey no, I'm not interested in you laugh, while putting her hands up to stop Daniel from doing whatever he was about to do, hoping to defuse the situation. A lot of people laugh nervously during awkward moments like this. It's a very common reaction when you reject someone's advances with a smile or just try to make light of an uncomfortable situation. Now, I wasn't there to witness what happened, but I just don't believe that Heather barked a laugh in Daniel's face because she thought he was just super unattractive or something. She wasn't a mean person. Heather was in a weird place mentally, and the last thing that she needed was a middle-aged dude just making passes at her. Well, in the end, Daniel Myers was taken to court, and if he was found guilty, he'd likely be given the death penalty, which left poor Daniel shaking in his boots. I always say this, but what is it with criminals, especially murderers, who have no regard for the lives of others, but when it comes to their own lives, I don't get it. But in the end, Daniel pleaded guilty to all of the charges, and there was no trial. At his sentencing, he was given life in prison with no possibility of parole in February of 2019, as a reward for cooperating with detectives and prosecutors. He was emotionless, stoic, and completely unfazed, while Heather's loved ones were crying their hearts out when details were being read aloud in court. And when it was Daniel's turn to speak, all he said was, "I have nothing to say." But here's the real kicker. Heather's murder was not believed to be his first rodeo. After his arrest in Heather's case, about 10 women came forward and told the police that Daniel was a piece of human garbage who habitually took advantage of innocent, vulnerable women. When Daniel's trailer was searched, several women's undergarments and inappropriate videos of Daniel with other women were found. This man was literally human scum. Also, he was suspected by several people when his then-girlfriend, Leigh Suter, was found with a single firearm injury to her chest in that trailer where Daniel lived in 2009. Leigh was found in her bedroom with a firearm right beside her. Ironically, she also worked at Whirlpool at the time, and even though it was Daniel who reported her death to the police, her sister suspected Daniel from the get-go. She stressed that her sister would never come close to a firearm because she hated them so much. Also, she couldn't have pulled the trigger by herself because the firearm was a rifle. It was long, and it just seemed implausible for her to choose this specific method to end her own life. Even Daniel knew that Leigh despised firearms, yet there was one in their home. Daniel claimed that it was for her protection, but her sister didn't think so. Leigh's case was reopened once again because detectives believed it wasn't handled the way it should have been, and it should have been treated as a homicide to begin with. But in the end, that investigation went nowhere, and Leigh's passing was officially ruled as her trying to end her own life. So it is highly possible, although not proven, that Daniel might have taken the lives of people before. And even if he hasn't, then he surely made women's lives miserable at the very least. This man is seriously in the perfect place now, behind bars and not in the outside world, terrorizing women and murdering them just because they don't give him what he wants. Before Daniel was sentenced in Heather's case, someone else was due to appear in court, and it was Sean O'Connell. See, for 15 months, he was after 3 people: Kenona Boer, Carrie Jeffrey, and Omar Satchel. Sean was adamant that these 3 people had something to do with Heather's murder. His theory entailed that Heather visited Kenona and Carrie for illegal substances, and on that fateful day, the trio murdered Heather over said illegal substances. And what proof did he have? Absolutely nothing. He didn't even bother telling the prosecution office that the DNA found on Heather's body didn't match anyone from the trio. He hadn't even peeked into Heather's cell phone records, something that Detective Nick did right away. And to make matters worse, when he was on Heather's case, records showed that he actually received an email from a woman who worked at Whirlpool, and she'd actually given information on a man who worked at Whirlpool who could have been responsible for Heather's murder. And that man was Daniel Myers. See, this woman had also been a target of Daniel. In the email that she sent to Sean, she said that she was attacked by him at his trailer, but luckily she managed to escape, and that the detective should probably look into it. This woman literally gave Sean information about Daniel on a silver platter. If Sean could have looked the other way for a second and stopped his obsession with pinning crimes on innocent people, then Heather's case would have been solved years ago. But did he do that? Well, obviously not, as I'm sure you know by now. After all was said and done, Sean was charged with obstructing official business, dereliction of duty, coercion, unauthorized use of property, tampering with physical evidence, and falsifying records. This guy had a laundry list of felonies. To think that this person handled Heather's case is just appalling. But in the end, he struck a plea deal and he was sentenced to just 2 years in prison in September of 2018. 2 years. When asked by the judge during his trial about the email that the woman had sent him about Daniel Myers, Sean claimed that he wasn't a technologically savvy person and he denied ever getting that email to begin with. This man's defense was quite literally that he didn't know how to properly open his email. In 2015, a lead detective didn't know how to operate an email. Sure. Well, thankfully, Sean was finally forced to pay for his crimes, and he obviously lost his job, then went to prison. But there hasn't really been any mention of what happened to him after that. He just faded into obscurity where he belongs. After everything played out, I think the outcome for this case was about as good as anyone could have hoped for. But it sure would have been great if it came sooner. But thanks to the actions of one man and one terrible detective, This family had to suffer the unbearable loss of an innocent woman like Heather, and their suffering was needlessly drawn out, all because one man couldn't get his ego in check. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories, but don't click away just yet. For those of you that stuck around this long, I wanted to leave you with one final story, and one that you're certain to never forget. This is the story of Christopher Chandler and the strange ghost car crash that occurred in December of 2002, and managed to solve his bizarre missing person case. It was December 11th, 2002, when the police arrived on the A3 road in Surrey. The police were called because people had witnessed a car swerving down the road recklessly. It was flashing its lights, changing lanes at the last minute, and was literally an accident waiting to happen. Well, it wasn't long until exactly that happened. People on the A3 reported that the car had apparently lost control and had fallen off the side of the road in the deep underbrush off the side of Highway Burpham near Guildford. Now, we don't know if anyone told the police about the car, what make it was, what the color was, etc. The details of the call are really vague, and honestly, it may have just happened so fast that people didn't get the chance to scramble for those details. But the police arrived at the scene, and right off the bat, things were weird. First of all, there was no one on the side of the road trying to help whoever had swerved their car off the road. There was literally no one there. Now, with car accidents, people flock really quickly. And I know that the road was busy, but judging by the apparent flood of calls that came in to the police, which we'll get to in a bit, the police expected a swarm of people on the side of the road. But there was no one. But the lack of people present wasn't the only thing that stood out to the police. There were no skid marks, no brake marks, no tire marks, nothing on the road leading into the underbrush towards the direction of the car. People claimed that the car was going crazy. It was speeding down the road, changing lanes, and it was a crazy scene. But there were no tire marks or skid marks on the road, or near the wooded area. It was kind of unsettling. The police initially thought that maybe they had the wrong place, or someone had pranked them with a bunch of hoax calls, but they decided to search nonetheless. Officers ventured in, and they were waiting to see anyone coming out of the woods to wave for help. But there was also no smoke or any hissing sounds coming from the dense and thickly wooded area, and considering the car had just crashed, billowing smoke would be the norm, right? Well, as soon as the police reached a little deeper into the woods, they made a discovery. There was a car down the embankment, and the police had finally found it. A maroon Vauxhall Astra was found crashed into the embankment off the A3. The nose of the car was actually inside the embankment, so it's safe to say the front of the car suffered the most impact. The windshield was cracked all the way from left to right, and the driver's side door was crushed in. From where the police were standing, they could see the driver's side of the car, and they had to circle the car to see the passenger side. But they didn't actually need to, because right through the driver's side window, the police made another discovery. The passenger door of the car was wide open, and not far from the car was the body of a man. But here's the thing, the crime scene wasn't fresh. Based on the condition of the remains, the man had been here for many months. The police were not only baffled but shocked. This made no sense, and it was such a bizarre scene, but the police were in for more shock. When the officers looked at the ground where the car was, they were surprised to not see any tire marks around here either. This car had just crashed. It had only been a couple of minutes, maybe 30 minutes if you were to stretch it. So where were the tire marks? It wasn't snowing, it wasn't raining, or anything. It was cold during this time of the month, but there wasn't a snowstorm that could have erased the tire tracks in just a couple of minutes. It almost looked like someone had airlifted this car wreckage and dropped it in this exact place. There was really no indication that a car had just swerved and crashed at that particular spot just minutes ago. Also, the police checked the car's lights, and they were all off. That's because the battery was dead, and it had been dead for a long time. The car was cold to the touch, too. Now, if you know anything about cars, then you would know that the hoods tend to get hot if the car is on for quite some time, and it takes a couple of hours typically for things to cool down. And even if the weather was chilly in December, it should have at least been slightly warm to the touch. Again, the calls about the crash occurred literal minutes ago. Now, like I mentioned, the battery had run flat as well, but not just a little bit. This battery was DUN done. I'm talking completely empty, past the point of being rechargeable or even jumpable. It had, just like the body, clearly been here for a number of months. That is just impossible. For all the police knew, the car was speeding down like it was an opening scene of Fast and Furious just minutes ago, but now the battery was dead and cold. Also, there was no smoke, no clicking, no hissing sounds coming from the engine. The car was quiet and completely silent. But the reason why there wasn't any smoke in or around the car was because there was no fuel in the car either. It was completely empty. It was all so confusing. How can a car be speeding on a road, lose control, and crash into an embankment and run out of both battery and fuel within minutes? But before we get into the story of the man that was found nearby the car, there was one last haunting detail that the police noticed. The car was rusting, and it was pretty old. Now I know what you're thinking. The car literally crashed into the underbrush. Of course, it's not going to be spotless and brand new. But see, that's not the case. The car looked like it had been here for quite some time, a lot of time. Again, it had to have been here for at least several months for this amount of rust to form. So these were the facts. The car had clearly been here a very long time, but knowing this, where was the car crash that had been called in just minutes ago? How could this rusted out car have been found in the exact spot where a crash supposedly occurred minutes ago, yet the car from the phone call was nowhere to be found? What was going on? Well, by now, the car and its estate were giving the police officers the weirdest of feelings, so they decided to hone in on the body next to it. They needed to identify this person and connect him to the car. Well, because the body had decayed almost completely by now, the only way the police could identify it was through dental records, and pretty soon the police had their answer. The body was identified as 21-year-old Brian Christopher Chandler. Brian was actually reported missing by his brothers 5 months ago, but that fit the timeline perfectly. So if you exclude the emergency phone calls, of course, this all makes sense. So who was Christopher Chandler? Well, not much is known about him other than the fact that he was from Middlesex and that he was wanted by the police. Yep, things kind of took a turn pretty quickly here. Basically, Christopher had committed a robbery, and he was wanted by the Metropolitan Police since July of that same year. He'd been on the run ever since, and he was last seen alive at a pub or a bar in Hounslow in West London, where he was having a couple of drinks with his friends. Now, since Christopher had committed a robbery, he was very antsy, and he would never stay in one place for too long. So that evening he was having some drinks with his friends, but after that, he decided he didn't want to stay there any longer, so he got in his car and drove away, presumably to look for another place to lay low for a couple of days. It was in July when Christopher's brother hadn't heard from him in a long time, and he decided to report him missing. Now, you might be thinking, why didn't Christopher's brother report him missing right away? Well, it wasn't that simple. Christopher's family knew that he was wanted for robbery, and the whole point of zero communication was to stay off the police's radar. So Christopher's brother was stuck in this very weird limbo of should or should not. Of course, he was worried for Christopher, but as soon as he went to the police station and reported him missing, the police would find him and throw him behind bars for the crime that he committed. So after waiting for a long time and a lot of back and forth, Christopher's brother finally decided to report him missing because he just couldn't get a hold of him, and he started to get increasingly worried. Furthermore, phone records showed that Christopher had actually made a call to his brother, if you could even call it that, because it seemed like the call lasted for only a second or even less than that. It was as if Christopher had dialed his brother's number and then immediately disconnected the call, which was really weird. We also don't know whether this call was made before the crash or, more hauntingly, after. So this was all the information the police had to work with. A wanted criminal goes missing 5 months ago. Some worried onlookers witnessed his car crash in December, yet the crash actually took place in July. What gives? Well, the police double-checked the car by running the license plates, and sure enough, the car was registered to none other than Christopher Chandler. So this was his car. So did the police accidentally stumble upon a missing person's body from July while trying to find the victim of a December car crash? Also, if witnesses noticed this most recent crash in December, how is it possible no one saw Chris's crash back in July? It was as if the car that was seen by witnesses disappeared, and in its place, Christopher's rusty, dusty, and wrecked car from 5 months ago magically appeared. While the police always tried to make logical sense of things, there were a lot of people, including people who were there, who saw the wrecked car in real time, as well as netizens who believed that there was something paranormal about this whole situation. So let's talk about some possible theories. I'll start with the logical ones first. Keep in mind, these are not official theories. Since it's a pretty bizarre case, people just have a lot of opinions, and I'm just compiling them and giving my own thoughts as well. But the first theory has to do with the witnesses who saw the car speeding down the A3, flashing its lights and driving recklessly. It's believed that there weren't many people who called in to the station. Instead, maybe there was just one person who called the police to let them know about the car, and essentially it was just a rumor that multiple people called to report the crash. But we have no evidence that just one person called in. Though in fairness, we don't have much evidence that dozens of people called either, but that's what most news stories report, is that multiple people called. So with this, the theory entails that the caller was a person who knew Christopher had been dead for 5 months by this point, and he gave the police a lead to check this area out. It's theorized that the whole car speeding out of control was a made-up story, and the call was made to lure the police to the area where Christopher and his car were found. Since there's no CCTV footage of the incident either, this theory could be believable. Also, the fact that no one stopped if a car went off the side of the road just further cements the claim that this car crash never happened, at least not in the way the caller reported. But it begs the question, who was this person? How did they know where Christopher was? And was it the person responsible for what happened to Christopher in the first place? Did this person call the police out of guilt that he had done something to Christopher? Who knows? Another theory is that there was a car speeding down the road, and it did go off the road at one point, coincidentally at or near the same place as Christopher's car, but it didn't crash. It may have looked like it went down the embankment, but perhaps the driver managed to get back on the road and went on his merry way. But by that time, the police reached the area and didn't notice that car, but they ended up finding Christopher's wreckage. Now, this could be the case, but again, we don't know if that's what actually happened or not. But if this were the case, I feel like police would have seen those more recent tire tracks from that more recent car skidding off the road a bit. But they didn't. But here's where things get more interesting. It's theorized that the people who saw the car swerving down the A3 actually saw a paranormal apparition of Christopher's accident from 5 months ago. So according to this theory, the accident did happen. It just happened 5 months ago. And the people who claimed to see a car going out of control on the road in December were actually seeing the ghastly replay of the incident. Think of it as a paranormal blast from the past, like a reel playing in front of people, but it's not really happening. It could be paranormal activity that some people saw, if you believe in that sort of thing. Whatever it was showing how Christopher could have lost his life those 5 months ago. Honestly, this incident was one of the most unsettling and talked about incidents to occur in the history of vehicle accidents, seriously. Even though the police still believed that it was a normal car collision that led them to finding Christopher, some people can't help but let their minds wander over the paranormal and eerie side of things. Whatever happened on that fateful day in December of 2002, it's still unexplained to this day, 23 years later. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. If you like this video and want to see more, be sure to subscribe. It's totally free. It just keeps you up to date with all of my latest cases. Also, if you want to become a member of the channel, you'll gain access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public. And it's a great way to support the channel and help out. And I appreciate all of you guys that have decided to do that. And if you want to join, you can click that big join button below the video or find a link down in the description. And don't forget, True Crime Stories t-shirts are also now available. You can grab one of those from a link down in the description as well. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.